Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to introduce our next speaker, Mrs. Lynette Lewis. Lynette Lewis has been inspiring men and women on issues of vision and purpose for over 20 years. She travels extensively, addressing audiences from 30 to 15,000 on topics including the power of purpose, building your personal brand and eminence, and many more. She is one of the John Maxwell's Maximum Impact speakers. Her first corporate book, Climbing the Ladder in Stilettos, was released in October of 2006, receiving recognition from numerous sources including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, the Dallas Morning News, and many more. Lynette has appeared frequently on radio and television programs, including The Today Show and Martha Stewart Living Radio. A passionate advocate for vulnerable children, she is the founder of StopChildTraffickingNow.org and the visionary behind its annual walks in several countries, 45 cities, and on 80 college campuses nationwide. A graduate of Oral Roberts University, she now serves on its board of trustees. It is an honor to have her here to join us today. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Lynette Lewis.
Good afternoon. Wonderful to be here. Not a lot of stilettos around here, I must say that. But what a joy to be here. It is my first time to Annapolis. My husband, wonderful privilege to have him with me, Ron Lewis. We just enjoyed it so far. We got here last night and have just been touring your campus and absolutely so proud of you. How impressive that you're here, that you're actually here at a leadership conference. Congratulations. It's always surprising to me how few people proportionately take advantage of these things. But we want to always remember that there are literally millions of people around the world who will never have a chance to go to a leadership conference like this. So congratulations for coming. Some wonderful speakers and certainly a leadership environment that you get to grow in and learn from and become part of that leadership environment. I'm excited to speak to you this afternoon on a topic that I really pondered. I thought, what could I share with you? Certainly in a leadership conference, we talk a lot about leading others, influencing others. But as I think back over my 28-year career and different experiences in my own life, I decided to focus in on this topic, which is leading through life's storms. And what I mean in particular is leading yourself through life's storms. I thought I might introduce you to my family before I get started. If you're like me, I like to know about people's families, personal stuff, right? So I'll just tell you real quick who I've got here. I've got 4 boys and my husband there in the middle. Our son Jordan is 21 on the left. Christian is living in Boulder, Colorado. That's our oldest son and his new wife, Ailsa. They are youth pastors in Edinburgh, Scotland. Actually, they're leading the church now. They started out as youth pastors. And that's our youngest son, John Luke. He decided not to go after the Naval Academy and instead is trying to become a rock star. So we'll see how that goes. But I just thought you might enjoy seeing my family. They're a joy to me. And I'll be sharing a little bit about them through some of my personal stories this afternoon. So leading through life's storms, leading through storms, I want to highlight this afternoon what I believe are 3 very common storms that you will face at some time in your life. I can say it with all assurance that you will face these storms. If not in their exact form, then in some form, because they're common to everyone. And more importantly, I want to talk a little bit about 3 navigation tools. Things that you all know a lot about. You spend your time studying how will you navigate storms out at sea or in the air or wherever you go. But what about life? What about our personal lives and those tools that we're going to need to navigate life's storms? I firmly believe that leaders have to have extra tools, not only for ourselves, but for those people who are following us. And that's really what I want to highlight today. We all leave college or leave home or at any juncture in our life and we think about, how's my life going to be? How will it be? And we have our ideas about what it's going to look like. You seniors in particular, I'm sure you're thinking about what's next and what's going to come, what you might do over the next few years. All of us, especially in a room like this of visionary leaders, we think about how our life's going to be. You're going to graduate, hopefully be happy in life, maybe have a family, earn a good living, have some perks in life. Well, when I was about your age, was in college, I had a vision of how my life was going to go. Similar, although I was going to be the next Barbara Walters and potentially have my own television show. I was a television major at Oral Roberts University, which is my alma mater in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Certainly thought I would get married. In fact, I always just assumed that I would meet my husband in college. I figured I grew up a Christian, wanted to marry a good, God-fearing man, and went to a Christian university, 2,000 men, 2,000 women. That must mean there is one for everyone. And I just assumed that by the time I got out of school, that I would have met my husband. But it didn't happen. So, as I say, I left with all my bridesmaids, but no husband in sight, which was fine. Thought this will be good, I'll have a career, and we'll go along for some things. Experiences, pursue a career, wasn't in television right away, had to pay the bills, but found another job in the employment placement field and started on my career. So we start out, we have these ideas, these visions of how our life is going to go, and we need those. They're important. They set sort of that aim out in front of us, and we want to go after those things. But then, invariably, no matter how talented we are, no matter how skilled, regardless of the leadership tools and skills that we have, doesn't matter how many awards we've gotten through college or even as we start our career, then, inevitably, storms come. Things happen. What I meant to say was stuff happens. And we go through storms, things that we can't plan on, things that we're trained for, but now we're in the real world and these things begin to happen. So I want to talk, as I said, about 3 storms. The first one I want to mention is what I call the storm of different. The storm of different. Now, at first hand, that may not sound like that big of a deal. I mean, after all, different is good, right? But what about when different is absolutely opposed to the things that you want most desperately? Things happen against your will, against your plan. Like I said, I wanted to get married early in life and figured, okay, I'll get out and work for a while, but started getting into my 30s and then even into my 40s, and it wasn't happening for me. And I could not understand what was becoming a storm in my life, a sense of, what should I do? This isn't going the way I planned. Certainly, getting married is a wonderful thing, but it's not a tragedy to not be married. But there are other tragedies, things that come along. We face stop signs, things that appear to be stopping our dreams, making us stop. In essence, we read it oftentimes as a dead end. But what do you do in Annapolis when you reach a stop sign? You stop, and then what do? You look both ways, and then what? Then you go. That's what leaders do. They face a stop sign, they take account of what's in the environment, and then they go. And I've had to learn that over and over in my life. As I said, I thought I was going to get married. Wouldn't have minded marrying a military man, but there were none in sight. Then 4 years ago in my life, I had a miscarriage. See, I married my husband when I was 42 years old, and on our wedding day, he gave me the gift of 4 teenage boys. 4 boys and no stretch marks is a really good deal. So we got married, and I was thrilled. I was in my 40s, but I thought, well, I can have a baby. I always dreamt of having a little girl. And then I had a miscarriage at 2 months and been through all kinds of things since then. And it really felt like a disaster, like a big storm. Days of grief where I could hardly crawl out of bed. Thought, what's wrong? And what have I done wrong? And has it been my fault? And all kinds of things to begin running through our minds when we get a storm that's different than what we planned. You will have things go differently. You will have plans, even some of your most ardent plans, things that everything's lined up perfectly for you, and something different will happen. How will you navigate that storm? What was I going to do when I was laying there in my home some days wondering, how will I get out of the house? I want so desperately to have a baby. Yes, I love my boys, and I love what has happened in my life and how it's come together, but what about this dream? What will I do to get over it? Plunged into the dark depths of the sea. So many questions we face in our lives. Have I made the right decisions? Have I done what's right? Could I have done more, not just around my miscarriage, but around a lot of things? Different bosses that I've had that just weren't what I planned, people that weren't necessarily for me like I wished I would have had. And so we face these storms of different. Something goes different. Last July, this is our third son, Jordan. He went on a summer missions trip with his university, went to Tanzania, and had about 20 nosebleeds while he was over there. He's always had some nasal challenges, but 20 nosebleeds, came back, was seeing an ear, nose, and throat doctor to get treated for what we thought was a lingering sinus infection. And on the day before his 21st birthday, we were told that he had stage 3 nasal cancer. Different than what he and we had planned. So as he describes it, he went from Tanzania at the place where he felt the most alive that he's ever felt before. And not even a month later, felt the closest to the feeling of death that he'd ever felt before. So we embarked on a treatment plan different than what we thought we would ever have to face. He went in, or he was diagnosed in July with stage 3 cancer, a very rare form of nasal cancer. The tumor was wrapped around both eyes and already penetrating part of the brain. And by the time they went in for surgery in August, it was stage 4 cancer. They decided not to take it all through the surgery. They got what they could and just put him on an aggressive treatment plan. So he went through, over the next few months, 71 rounds of chemotherapy, of radiation, twice a day. I call him my valiant soldier. He got up in the morning, never complained once through his treatments, went in the morning at 6:45, came home, slept, went back at 1:45. 8 rounds of chemo, 5 MRIs, 2 surgeries, and I'm happy to tell you that in December, right around Christmas, we got the great news that he is now cancer-free. So we're grateful. Jordan beat it, and through the help of thousands of prayers from around the world, faith and medicine combined healed our son. He's still fighting the fight. I was with him on Friday in Tulsa. We were in the hospital for other ongoing lingering effects, but he's fighting it. It's been a different storm. But he tweeted right at Christmas, he said, "It's interesting how this could be both the worst year of my life and the best year of my life." Isn't that how life goes when you face these storms? You will face storms. It may be physical, it may be financial. Many of you faced many storms already. You may relate to some of what I'm talking about. But the storms of different give us opportunities, and here's what leaders do. Leaders persevere, and one of my very favorite words, that's innovate. They innovate. Something good comes out of our test and out of our trial. As I said before, we don't misinterpret the stop signs. They're not dead-end signs. And in fact, if you really had to get somewhere where you were going, even if you ran into a dead-end sign, would anyone in this room stop? No. You'd find another way around it. I think of Lance Armstrong and the Livestrong Foundation, something that would have never been created or put in place had he not faced his different storm. Now, how many millions and millions of dollars and people and the rallying cry in the nation for the Livestrong campaign. He innovated out of his tragedy. For us, just tell you briefly around our story, right on the throes of my miscarriage, when I wondered how I'd ever get over the greatest grief in my life, I started simultaneously hearing about this, what I consider to be the most horrendous crime of our age, and that is the sex trafficking of little children. I was having a conversation one night after our church service in New York with an NYU student. She started talking to me about the volunteering she was doing. And what I was appalled to find out was that the U.S. is now the #1 destination for trafficked children in the world. I had a 6-year-old niece at the time who I adore, and I kept imagining my niece Allie. What would I do if she was being trafficked for sexual purposes at her young age into the U.S.? Most people would call it America's dirty little secret because it's going on right under our noses. And so I couldn't sleep at night, not only over my grief, but over what I began to learn about the issue of sex trafficking. And so I'll be honest with you, I woke up in January now, several months after our grief, and I turned to my husband one day, and he actually turned to me and he said, "Why don't we do something? If you feel this passionate, you're keeping both of us up at night, why don't we do something?" And so we simply decided to innovate, to get creative. We got smart. We found ourselves weeks later at a briefing in the White House by an invitation through the Office of Trafficking in Persons. And the more we studied the issue, the more we began to realize that part of the problem has been that at that time there were over 260 organizations focused on rescuing children, which is absolutely essential, but very little done for what we call the demand side of the issue, the predators who are buying these children for sex. And so, interestingly, we had a conversation with one of our dear friends, Clark Stewart. Some of you may know Clark. He's been a part of, he was Navy SEAL for years, part of the Dev group, and he was now retired, and Ron and he were talking, and Ron kept saying, Clark, what are you going to do about this situation? He said, Ron, I'm busy. I got lots going on. Called him again. Clark, what are you going to do about this situation? And like many of you would rise to the task, he did. And so now Clark Stewart and his organization is partnered with our organization, Stop Child Trafficking Now. And here's what we do. Stop Child Trafficking Now raises money. We've done events all over the country. We did a stilettos run even in New York City. I love stilettos. I wrote a book about it, with the word in my title, and so we did a stilettos run. Anything to raise money. We've raised nearly $1 million in the last 3 years, which we give to Clark Stewart and his organization. And his organization hires retired military, many men like you come off the field who have the intelligence skills and the capability to profile and track predators. They turn the evidence over to law enforcement, and that evidence will hold up in a court of law, and they're able to start pushing back the trend in our nation. It was an innovative strategy. We compare it to like curing cancer. It's going to take millions of dollars and many years, but we believe we can make a difference. I finally decided at the end of the day that if I couldn't have a child of my own, maybe I could go save someone else's. And thus was born Stop Child Trafficking Now. When you face those different storms and you wonder how you'll get through, I encourage you to take what you have and innovate. Think outside the box. Do something different. Be bold. Don't wait for permission. So often we sit back and we think, especially people who are used to respecting lines of authority, and we think that we need to wait till someone picks us out and assigns to us a task. I've learned over and over that if we wait for permission, we will not innovate. We will not get out and be bold. So get out and be bold and innovate according to your dreams. The next storm is what I call this a storm of detractors. What are detractors? Well, they're skeptics. They're people that come in and they question what we're doing. Some of you probably faced some skeptics even when you decided to apply to the Naval Academy. People say, why are you doing that? Sometimes family members. It's such a prestigious thing, and yet there's still skeptics. There's critics, people criticizing. I've been amazed when we're trying just to do our own simple part to stop child trafficking, how many critics have come out of the woodwork, debating our solution, debating our strategy, fighting us, spending hours and attorney fees just to back up what we're trying to do. And then, of course, there's outright enemies, people we have to fight, we have to come up against. The thing I've found about leaders is we're open, but we don't compromise. I'm open to criticism. I want critics because I want to become better, but I'm not going to compromise my vision, and neither should you. And leaders walk in truth. What is truth? The way it really is. The way it really is. You can imagine being single all those years till I was 42. I had plenty of critics, plenty of skeptics telling me, well, no wonder you're not married, Lynette. Some of you ladies might relate to this. I was getting out and speaking and doing some different things, and they'd say, well, of course you're not married, Lynette. I mean, what guy's going to want a strong woman like this? Maybe you need to tone yourself down a little bit. Or everybody had their formulas to tell me why it wasn't working. Here's something I've learned going through suffering and going through storms. People that are suffering don't need formulas. Don't need formulas. Well, if you did X, Y, and Z, you'd get over it. Our dear son Jordan, as he's been going through cancer, one night we were talking about the funny things you hear people tell you when you get cancer. Things like, have you tried more carrot juice? You know, you appreciate the advice, but there's a lot bigger things going on. And I'll tell you, one thing you learn through suffering, going through storms, barely making it out alive, is you learn to be compassionate, patient with people, understanding when people don't have the answers that they're looking for. Why? Because I've been in those moments where I didn't have any answers. Oh, if I could have only got an answer for why I had a miscarriage or why things were going the way they were, it would have been so much easier to deal with. It's the not knowing when you're in the middle of the ocean. Why did this happen? Especially go-getter type people like you all who plan and map out and are part of a plan. You come in, people put you on a plan. They help you plan. They help you fulfill your plan and fulfill your strategy. But what happens when something takes you off course? You persevere. You persevere. You walk in truth. So the storm of detractors will come. That's the second storm. And then there's what I call the storm of dysfunction. This isn't a term you often hear when you hear people talking about leadership, but I believe in this topic so much, and I believe it's so important to discuss. I had to include it in the remarks I'm making to you today. because I think it's something that needs to be talked about a whole lot more in order to get past it. Even in my book, which is a business book, Climbing the Ladder in Stilettos, chapter number 2, I said if I'm going to write a business book, I'm going to put a chapter in there called Personal Wholeness and how to find it and how to seek it. Every single person in this room, every person anywhere has brokenness, personal brokenness. We go through rough things. Parents divorce, parents leave. We go through suffering. It's hard. For me, I grew up in a wonderful home, but when I got to college, and college, quite honestly, is oftentimes when brokenness starts appearing. We start seeing symptoms, and for me, I grew up in a great home, but my dad was not very verbal. Didn't give me any affirmation. Don't remember him ever kissing me or hugging me or telling me that I was successful. My mom told me he was proud of me, but I never remembered that personally. So I got to college and started getting in leadership roles and had this drive to be perfect. Perfect everything. Perfect student, perfect friend, perfect daughter, perfect sister. Perfect, had to be perfect. And about my junior year, it started all kind of caving in. And I was crying all the time. I couldn't seem to cope. There were things coming out. Oh, I could cover it over pretty good most times, but then it got to be where I just couldn't cope much anymore. And so my parents wisely suggested I go see a counselor. The counselor and I spent weeks together and started peeling back the layers, and I got to the root of my pain, which is basically I'm still trying to get my dad to tell me I'm good enough. One of the reasons I talk about this storm of dysfunction with leaders is because what we do as leaders so often is we cover over our dysfunctions. And by the way, you don't ever need to be ashamed of your brokenness or your dysfunctions, but don't stay there. Go for healing. Go for wholeness. Go for it. It's essential. And how do we know if we've got dysfunction? Well, we just look at the symptoms. We look at us, the overbearing need for approval, or that striving that never lets us go, or the need to numb certain emotions because they're too painful to confront. You know, when our son Jordan was diagnosed with cancer, he looked great. Would have never even known that he had cancer. Looked happy and handsome and no symptoms other than the nosebleeds. But then he had to go in for surgery. One of the reasons most people don't deal with their brokenness is because on the process to wholeness, it gets messy. It's a lot easier just to cover over it and not have to really dive in and deal with it. But just like Jordan, we had to take him in and he had to go through surgery. And when he came out of surgery, and even still now today, he looks a whole lot worse, cancer-free, than he looked 5 months ago before he got the surgery. But here's our great hope. Someday Jordan moves on. He moves on from his brokenness. No more lingering effects. He's over all of the side effects of the treatments, and he can live free, and there's nothing going to come back to grab him later. See, there's no such thing as a secret, and our dysfunctions will come out, and our brokenness will come out, and you, my friends, need to be whole people. You need wholeness in every area of your body, mind, spirit, soul, and don't ever be ashamed of what is hidden and maybe only you know. But don't stay there. Move through it. The storm of dysfunction is so messy and people don't want to deal with it, but it will come out. And until we're whole and healthy, I was so glad that I dealt with some of my brokenness as a single person. I honestly think I would have picked someone different if I was still dealing with some of those strivings that I had early in my 20s. I like to describe wholeness in contrast to this. When we're broken, we're kind of eating off of a parched plate. Because you can only give out as a leader. You can only impart to the people you lead, to your wife, to your husband, to your children, to your friends. You're only able to give out of the full plate you have. Wholeness looks like this. Delicious, full, multi-dimensional meal that you have to offer. Now, I always tell, I do a lot of dating seminars in my life in church. My husband is a pastor, and so we pastor 2 churches. We have a church in New York City and a church in Raleigh, North Carolina. And since I was single for so long, in my 20s, I started getting asked to do singles seminars, which frankly, I was not too excited about, but I was glad for the invitations. And so when I speak to singles, I'll say it like this. When you're not whole and when you're broken, you come to the table, and this is what people are eating off here on the right. I'm sorry, on the left. Kind of parched plates, just hoping someone's going to feed me with what I'm lacking. But if we do the work and we give get our act together and we spend time cultivating the wholeness we need, then we end up with a full plate. People say, wow, I want to spend time with him. I want to hang around her. She's the leader I want to follow. Why? Because it's out of the abundance the heart can give. And now the fullness and the wholeness and the things we've done to reconstruct the broken places, now they offer us opportunities to give. And now when I marry my wonderful, awesome husband, in my 40s, we sit down and thankfully, because we both spent lots of time dealing with our issues, we still have a few, mainly me, but we could sit down and we have a full plate. And now it's such a joy to be with someone like that. Why? Because we're full and we walk away fed, and not only can we feed each other out of the fullness and share what we have, but now it's so many other people want to be around us and come in, and we could feed our children, we could feed our churches, and that we start an organization called Stop Child Trafficking Now that demands more than we ever thought we could give. When we started SCT Now, we had no money, no time, no resources, and pretty much no know-how. But we had passion, we had a vision. And because we spent time cultivating that wholeness, we could multiply what we had. See, if you want to be the kind of leader that people want to be around, then work on your personal wholeness. It's a lifelong journey. You get to a place of fairly put together wholeness, but there'll always be new signs that you need to deal with. Once you confront it, then you don't fear it anymore. Now's the time. For those of you who are young and here at school, now's the time to begin to use the season in your life and the resources here to deal with your brokenness, to deal with those places that show up. Don't ever be ashamed of it. Some of you might sit around and think, well, if anybody found out this part of me, I don't know that if I could live with it. Well, let me tell you, in a group this size, there's more than one person dealing with every single thing here. And I want to encourage you to go for wholeness, fill your plate, become a full person. Then you'll have so much to give. So what are 3 navigation tools as I start wrapping up here, and then we'll open up for Q&A. 3 navigation tools. The first one is faith. I loved reading about the U.S. Naval Academy, and I've always been fascinated with it, but I love how there's really a place here for you to dive into your faith. Whatever your faith might be, this will be your anchor. Some sort of faith in someone bigger than yourself. I honestly do not know how we would have gotten through Jordan's journey if we did not have our faith and the faith of friends. Because there are days when you can't even pray your own prayers. You just need someone to call you up at the perfect moment or send you a text and say, here's what I'm praying for you today. Find faith. Dive in. Cultivate your faith. Stir it up. You cultivate faith and you grow in faith for the moment when you need it. That's when you need it. You pull it. It's there. It's like when your mom says, we're not going to stop for 4 hours, so you better eat now or else you're going to be hungry. You think, oh, I'm not that hungry. But 4 hours later, you're glad you had something to eat. Feed your faith. Cultivate it. The second thing, the second navigation tool is what I call fortitude and perseverance. It is a marathon. I'm a big runner. It's funny that I'm speaking at the Naval Academy because I hate swimming. Can I be honest with you? I'm not a swimmer. My husband would say it's because I hate getting my hair wet. He's probably right. But I love to run, and so I've run a lot over the years, and I get a lot of analogies when I run. I have yet to do the New York City Marathon, which I want to do, but I love to run. And so often when I'll be going through things in my life, I'll turn certain bends and I'll just think, this is what I feel like in my life right now. But I'm going to make it to that finish. And races in particular are great. And you've got to have fortitude. You just decide, I'm not going to cut out. You know, it may be easy in an environment like this to have people who are all committed to fortitude. But I promise you, you're going to have lonely places at times in your careers, in your families, in your marriages, in your homes, when your children get sick or when you get sick, where you're going to need just that hardcore fortitude that says we're not cutting out. We're going to stick with it. And last and probably most important, we need friends. I had an interesting experience the first year I moved to New York City. I decided to go out and watch the New York City Marathon. Anybody here ever run the New York City Marathon? Nobody? Everybody says it's the best marathon to run if you're going to run one because all along the 5 boroughs, people come out in droves and stand and cheer people on, offer them drinks and all that. So I decided, well, I'll go out. I lived not too far from Central Park, so I went in the park one day, And I was standing along. You have to fight your way to get into the crowd. I was standing along, and this is about a half a mile before you make the finish line. So you're seeing people coming through, and they're pretty tired, 26.2 miles. They're feeling it. The thing I love about the marathon is that every shape and size and age, and I mean, it's just the most diverse amount of people. It's awesome. So I'm standing there along the side, and I noticed this guy coming down running, and his name was Jerry. And I knew that was his name because Jerry had a t-shirt on that said Jerry. And I remember thinking, oh, bless Jerry's heart. That's the last thing I'd be doing is wearing a shirt with my name on it. Just seemed a little funky to me. And then before long, I saw another woman running along, and her name was obviously Mary. She had her name on her front of her shirt. And I thought, man, bless their hearts. It's just so funny to me. It's almost like going to the fair, and I'm with her, and I'm with him, and we got these T-shirts. But then I heard the woman just down from me start shouting, "Go, Jerry! Jerry, you're looking good, Jerry!" And the person not from me, "Go, Mary! Go, Mary! Mary!" I mean, people were and all around where Jerry and Mary were running through, people were crying out, calling their names. And then I knew that I was the foolish one. Because when Mary and Jerry got up that morning and they thought about 26.2 miles, they knew that when they were almost finished, they'd probably need someone calling out their name. Who's calling out your name? Who in your life believes in your leadership, believes in your call, believes in your destiny? And will you be bold enough to wear your name, to walk into your leadership roles, to walk into your life right now and say, here I am, the whole package. Yeah, I've been through some storms. This is what happened, and I'm still plowing my way out. What's wrong with that? But here's who I am. Here's my name. Will you join me? Will you stand with me? Will you call out my name? Because I couldn't have made it all those years as a single woman, quite honestly, without my friends. My very best friend, Tony, who I met my freshman year in college, she got married within a year of getting out of school, and she now has 10 children. She has 10 children. So all those years, Tony was busy having baby after baby after baby. And I was like, Lord, can I just have a husband? I mean, she's got 10 kids and a husband. But Tony was the one that I would call when I was discouraged or I'd have a bad date. I added it up one day. I thought, man, I feel like I've been on a lot of blind dates. You get set up on a lot of blind dates when you're single. And I added it up one day, and I figured out it had been 65 blind dates. Thank you for feeling my pain. And there'd be nights when I'd come home and I'd just be so discouraged. On my 40th birthday, I was in Hawaii speaking for a business conference. And I was so honored and pleased that I could do that. But I was equally as discouraged that here I was turning 40 with no prospects in sight. But Tony was just a phone call away, and it didn't matter how many dirty diapers she had, she would always comfort me. Not with formulas, but just saying, Lynette, you're going to do it. You're going to make it. You're not settling. He's not your type, Lynette. Nope, not good enough. Who's calling out your name? Who's saying, yeah, I'm going to stick with you while you plow through some of these brokenness issues. I'm going to push you to your next level. It's easy in this environment to feel like we have lifetime friends, but what about the friends you're going to need 5 years from now? What about the friends who not only are going to be in the ship with you or in the plane with you or wherever you go, but they're going to be in life with you? And you're going to be transparent enough as a leader to talk about what you're going through. I've just made it a commitment. In every leadership role I'm in, I'm transparent. In fact, I do team building days where we get around a circle and we talk about what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are we going through? I find that we lead through our strengths, but we connect through our weaknesses. Weaknesses are what will make people connect to you. Don't ever, as a leader, be hesitant to talk about what you're going through. Yes, you use discernment, and of course there are times when it's appropriate, but I just want to be real. Why? Because everybody has stuff. So I want to encourage you today, do what it takes to deal with the storms of life, because I know you're going to be great. And when you do it, you're going to lead strong. That's all I have. I'm going to open it up for Q&A, but thank you for the honor and the privilege of being able to be part of your leadership conference this year. It's my privilege. have any questions?
Good afternoon, ma'am. Midshipman Third Class Townsend from the University of Memphis. My mother is actually very involved in child trafficking, and that cause. She's been sharing a lot of facts with me, and I think one of the most interesting ones is that 95% of the young women who are in these brothels, especially overseas, are actually slaves, and they get none of the money that they get from these men that come in and, you know, use their services. And another interesting fact is that the majority of those men are soldiers and military personnel. How would you suggest that we educate the men and women in our military about that fact and how it's very important that we take into consideration that we are actually putting our money into a sex trafficking business that we are fighting against?
Wow. I mean, that's sobering, isn't it, to think of that? We've heard some reports in that regard. You know, and this may sound so obvious based on what I just said, but I think it gets back to what I was just talking about, personal brokenness. You know, whole people don't do that. They're not prone to go do crime activity. They're not prone to abuse other people. They're not prone to go take advantage of innocent children. And I think that part of it is just an education to say, hey, what does wholeness look like for you? And help people deal with some of their problems and some of their issues. I think there also needs to be just a real education, especially some of the people we've worked with in the sex trafficking world is very collaborative for the most part. Everybody's doing different pieces of it. As I mentioned, we focus on the demand side of the issue, but there is obviously a need to collaborate. And one of the things that we had heard about, some education going in even to middle school and high school, actually educating, especially young men, on the history of how a lot of these young women are brought in and what that's really all about, so that they don't buy the lies of the promotion, especially overseas when it's so readily available and seemingly inconsequential to these girls. So I think that's a great question. There's certainly more work to be done, but it would probably be a great way for even some of us in this room to innovate new strategies around that particular issue, because it's very serious and it is a big issue. So thank you for bringing that up. That's clearly there's so many different dimensions of this, and again, when you find something that moves your heart about an issue, find out what's being done about that response to the issue, and don't be reluctant to innovate, to start small, to start something right here. If that's a passion of yours, how can you start it right here at the Naval Academy and begin to educate and answer questions and create a safe place for people to dialogue about temptations they face or brokenness that leads them to do that kind of thing? I think it could be really, really awesome. Thank you for bringing that up. It's great perspective on the world issue. Yes, sir. That makes me feel a whole lot better. You know, it's a great question, and I see it from two vantage points, quite honestly. One is, how do you lead from the ranks? And I ran into this many times in my career. When I was low person on the totem pole, I had student workers and volunteers that were working on my team. And I would have such a vision to transform my organization. I wanted more leadership tools. I wanted more of this kind of atmosphere in my own team. And so what I simply did is, without asking for permission, I put together a small little team building day, I called it. Didn't know how to do a team building day, went on the internet, read a few articles, put some exercises together. Exercises to get my team, my small little team, to share on that more personal level, creating that feeling of compassion among our team members. Then I went to another job. When I moved to New York City, I went to work for Deloitte & Touche, big corporate consulting firm. I found myself with another team. Well, it had worked for my other team, so I brought that tool into my team. And as I brought it into the team, word got out and people started talking. My team started talking to other people about what they got out of it. Before long, my boss said, would you be willing to bring this to our bigger team? So I guess my summary point to you is, even without more of an official sanction of we're going to infuse these values into our culture, start doing it in your own circle, where you have a passion to see it happen, with your own company or whatever it is that you have influence to. Start experimenting. There's so much to be said about experimenting with tools, with dialogue, with an atmosphere where you really want to see the safety net, in a sense, come out so that people can be more vulnerable and more open and show those skills of compassion. And then, if you're really passionate about seeding it into the organization, keep a record of what happens. Get some anecdotal stories you can tell to people in leadership. Talk about the changes you saw through the year that came about in your company and the difference that made, and be bold in sharing what you learned. That's how you affect change from the ranks. You don't need permission. You don't need to be put on an official committee, but you start where you are, and then the impact and the success creates more room for it later. Is that helpful? Great. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Lieutenant Michael Humara from USC, officer instructor. Last night, General Mattis talked about why we do things the right way, even though the enemy doesn't necessarily abide by the same rules. What do you do? Because I'm sure we can all agree that protecting children is a national value, even if it's not written down. But if I'm not mistaken, the problem exists when you start butting up against our other national value of privacy. So you want to stop trafficking of children, but there's this other value that we also hold very dear. When those two conflict, how do you resolve it? Or any values for that matter?
And you said privacy, right? You said
if that's
that was the word that you used. I couldn't quite hear what you said. I think that's a challenge. And one of the reasons we've loved working with Clark Stewart, who's from your own ranks, is he understands kind of those balances, not only from a sort of philosophical standpoint, but also from a legal standpoint. And how do you create strategies that don't disregard laws, law enforcement and all that, but find ways to creatively get in. And I think it takes, again, I'm back to that innovative spirit, finding new ways to think outside the box. But it is a tension. There's always a tension with everything. You know, you go through grief in life when you lose someone, and you'll hear from people, well, you got to grieve. You got to walk through your grief. But then there's the tension of, but you can't stay there too long, because now you're getting into too far extreme. So the same is true with any value. You want to be open and transparent as a leader. But Chris and we were talking at lunch, and he's a leader over his company. Is that the right way to say it? He's giving me that, well, okay. But then he's also the leader, so there's only so much transparency he can share. And I think that's where it just really takes people who will put thought and test and try and experiment with some things to see where you can make inroads, not take the way it's always been as the final vote, but also be respectful of the systems. And what you all are getting as a great advantage is you're learning to know the systems. The systems are great. I mean, Ron and I are walking around this campus thinking, oh, for more tradition, oh, for more history. But at the same time, there are going to be always new ways to innovate. And so I don't know if that's a perfect answer to your question, but I think that tension will always exist. And it just becomes part of that, learning how to feel your way out of that, but being knowledgeable and informed. I'll tell you one thing, I have a lot of young people who hear me talk about SCT now, Stop Child Trafficking Now, and the first thing they'll do when they talk to me afterwards is they'll say, I've always wanted to start a nonprofit to do whatever. And my first response always to them is, first get knowledgeable. Go out, study. Who's doing what on the topic you're interested in? Who's the best out there? Who is writing the articles? Who are the knowledge people? Who are the thinkers? Who are the people speaking for this issue? Then find out where there's a missing link and see if you can go fill it. Then you become informed, but you also become a catalyst for change. So I don't know if I totally answered that, but great question.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Hello, Midshipman Dixon. Thank you, ma'am, so much for coming to talk to us about this very tragic issue happening even in our own country. Speaking of our country, what can legislation do to curb this, and what do we do with the misfits that we do find, the ones that are producing the materials for child pornography?
It's a very multidimensional issue, as any of you who know about the issue understand. It is clearly getting knowledge out. One of the goals we've had as an organization is not only to fundraise, but to create awareness. As I said, most people in America still don't know that it's going on in our own backyards. So clearly we want to be informed. One of the reasons we chose to focus on the predators is because we firmly believe in all the studying we've done that until you shut down the demand, you will never, ever get rid of the crime. I mean, you could rescue 5 girls and tomorrow there'll be 5 more replacing her because the buyer's at the door. But at the same time, we're not going to stop there. And so repeat your question to me again, the last part of that.
Last part, what do we do with the misfits that we do find, the ones in society that are the producers?
You're talking about the ones who are vulnerable for it?
The ones that are actually like facilitating the creation of putting these girls and young boys
Right.
in sex trade.
So we have supply, demand, and distribution. And what you're talking about there is really the distribution piece. These are the people that are running the organization. In all that we've looked at, we don't necessarily believe going after the distributor is going to be the solution. Because again, that person can be easily replaced as long as the person at the door is ready to buy. So there's lots being done. I mean, the good news in America is that our laws have really gotten a lot more robust and strong over the last 10 years. In most states, and certainly the federal laws are very good now. Are they where they should be? There'd be people more expert than I to comment on that, but they've come a long way. Now what problem we have is we've got law enforcement agencies around the nation that are facing tremendous budget cutbacks. They can't really afford the number of officers out there to really go find the distributors and those that are vulnerable, which is why we firmly believe that the private sector needs to partner, and is really what we're doing and what Clark Stewart's doing with his organization. But again, we picked the piece that we thought was most under-addressed and that would have the best potential for starting to cut off the source at its real core. And I don't know what you could practically do for distributors. It's internet-driven. As we always say, it used to be the corner where the woman sold herself for sex, and now it's all online. So it's much more difficult to fight that kind of thing. But I will tell you this, if you see something that you think is unusual and awkward, report it to someone, because it probably is. And it takes all of us just being aware and doing what we can to get the word out. So thank you. Thanks for caring about it.
Midshipman Gortat from Polish Naval Academy. You've mentioned a very important thing, leaders' weakness. We are only people. We all have friends to talk with, but in our daily life, in our daily serving in military units, we have our subordinates who expect us to be strong and so they can follow us. So what would be your advice or recipe for the bad days in our lives when we still have to be in the position of leader?
That is a great question. And it is part of the dilemma of being a leader, isn't it? Because you want to be strong, especially in an environment that rewards and recognizes strength. So here's what I try to do. I try to, with all of my teams that I've ever led, especially in the last 7 to 8 years, where I'm really in most often a leadership role at this stage in my career, more than being a subordinate. I try to let people know that I go through things, because everybody does. And one of the greatest compliments someone will give me after I speak or when I'm sharing is, you seem so real. See, what we do when we have people that are higher up, what do we automatically do? The very fact that I would walk up on a podium would, by its nature, lead you to believe that I've really got my act together, or hopefully I do, right? So what I try to do is, again, we lead through our strengths, but we connect through our weaknesses. So we share pieces of the journey. Don't have to dive into all the details. Don't have to talk about everything. I would talk about a lot more detail of some of my personal things I'm going through with friends, for instance, or even teams I lead in the church, than I would if I'm at Deloitte & Touche, leading a whole team of practitioners to go get business with Johnson & Johnson. But if I'm in a conversation with someone after I'm leaving a meeting, let's say my Johnson & Johnson team's in there and we're walking out, and a man starts sharing with me about how he's really having a problem with his teenager, or one of the women, I'll remember conversations like this, we're just going through it with my son, he's just not doing well in school and whatever. I will be quick in those cases to share some common stories and offer encouragement that I've found through my own journey. And certainly, when it's subordinates, they need to know I'm real, I'm going through it, I don't have all the answers, but I'm not going to be deterred by the suffering. And I think that's what people want from leaders. They just want to know that you're not going to cave, that you're going to make it. The year I discovered all these challenges I was having in my own life relative to my father, I was a resident advisor. I had 30 young women looking to me. I ended up having to even take time off campus and go away for 6 weeks and really just get off campus. But when I came back, can you imagine what the reaction was? Man, now we're even more there for Lynette. Why? Because she's real. And not because she can't overcome it, but because she's doing what it takes to become better and to become more whole. I think the world is crying out for transparent, vulnerable leaders who will understand how to really be honest and transparent with what they're going through. And if you'll find your way. See, some of it's personality. I tell everything. I'm that kind of a person. You may be more of a private person. You may not be as prone to tell those things. But you learn. That's part of leadership, is you stretch your muscles. You experiment. Maybe you share something one day and you didn't feel good about it. It felt awkward. Then you talk to a trusted colleague at the same level and you say, how did that come across? Did it work? Did it seem too vulnerable, too real? Get input from people. Say, no, that worked. Let me tell you what people felt from that. And you test and you learn. And at this age, you're just beginning to develop your toolkit of leadership skills. But be willing to experiment. Try it. Move out of the comfort zone a little bit relative to leading others. And then ask people how it works and see how you can develop over time. Great question. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Midshipman First Class Smith from the Naval Academy. I was just wondering if you could expand on your experiences or difficulties you may have faced as a female in the corporate world and as a team leader, just because it's easy on the yard to get a female's experience in the military, but I was just wondering in the civilian world what you might have faced.
Great question. Thank you for asking. It's definitely an interesting journey. People will ask me, I'll give you a couple points people ask me about a lot. How do you stay feminine and ladylike amidst a whole big, huge group of men? And I worked, most of the environments I've been in have been very male-dominated, especially the last 10 years I worked at Deloitte & Touche in New York City, very male-dominated environment, consultants, tax people, accountants. And here's something I learned, and I would encourage it for you men as well, as you're going to be leading women on your teams, is I just said, be who you are. Let your personality shine. For instance, women tend to talk more about emotional things. How's the family? What's going on with the kids? Like I said, I started out my whole presentation showing you a family picture. We think about those things sometimes. And what I found is, if I'm comfortable with myself being feminine in an environment where maybe the rest of the people are different than me, then the other people feel comfortable as well. So it's really learning to be comfortable with who you are. But that's a challenge. And what I found is, and I would even experiment. Again, you hear me talk about experimenting a lot. I'm a big experimenter. I'll be at a meeting, and I'll be leading a whole group of men, and I'll try certain techniques on how to present my plan or how to convey how we're going to run the team, and I'll be perceptive. And if I find, you can read people, you can find all of a sudden, I'll find the men's eyes glazing over. Maybe that technique didn't work too well, so I'll try another one. And I'll just experiment with being myself. I love fashion. I work in New York City, and most of those people there dress, at Deloitte, they dress very conservatively. So how am I going to be true to my style, but not be offensive or not take it too far? So people love you when you're yourself. That's what we want to see, isn't it? We want to see authentic people being themselves, but with discretion. And it gets back to that wholeness. When I'm whole, I'm not doing it out of need, but I'm doing it sincerely out of serving the people that I work with. So I think that's a big thing. I also believe, and this is really an opportunity for those of you that are here at the Naval Academy, I really believe that a lot of what women more my age and a little bit older have fought for, that glass ceiling that we hear about, I don't really think that there's a glass ceiling so much anymore. I think the opportunities for you are vast and varied, and talent will always open doors. Now, it may not open a door for me in every single situation paying the same amount of money, with the same title, but your gift will make room for you. And if you stay true to your talent and you keep pushing it out there and offering it and doing it as a place of service and being bold with what you have to bring, people will respect talent. And over time, you win the hearts of the people that you work with. And I was usually the one, I'm very big on dealing with people on a personal level, and if I found out someone was going through something with their child or their marriage or whatever, I was very discretionary. I wouldn't get into marriage issues with my male colleagues, but I was sympathetic. One of my worst bosses, he was on that detractor slide. He, for some reason, was so opposed to me. He had hired me, thought I was so great and wonderful, and in 6 months into it, gave me the worst professional review I'd ever had. I was quite upset with him. I thought, I've worked harder the last 6 months in my career than ever before, and now I get the worst professional review. I was working day and night. I had no mentors. I was trying to get his time to teach me what I was doing. He wouldn't give me the time. But then I began to realize and started learning that he had some very traumatic things going on with one of his children. I mean, traumatic. In and out of hospitals, high needs child. And so when I learned that, I became more compassionate. And now, being a woman, I can be more understanding. And so I just gave him more leeway. And I think people quite honestly pick up in their spirit if you're for them or against them. And it was interesting how I could feel a shift in my relationship with him, just as I became more compassionate. And every once in a while, we'd be in the hall, and I'd say, hey, how's it going with your daughter? I heard that she's just started a new school. Immediately, face brightens up. Yeah, we're really excited about it. And I find a relatability factor there. Use your skills as a woman. Don't hold them back. Likewise, use your strengths as a man. But we need each other, and the workplace is so much better if we both give what we have to give and not hold back. That's a long answer, but I hope that was helpful.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. How are we doing on time here? Someone going to let me know when it's... Last question. Okay. Yes, sir.
Hey, my name is Anh. I'm studying business at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln.
Great.
Yes, so my question is a little bit personal, so you don't have to answer it. Like, did your dad finally say, like, you are good enough? Because I was in some kind of similar situation when my dad never, like, give me some word of encouragement, like, never hug me, never say he's proud of me. And then it's kind of like the Asian thing when parents try to push their children, like, to do better next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the last time I look back, like, he passed away 4 years ago, so I feel like I have not done anything to make him proud. So I just want to ask you if your dad say you're good enough.
Oh, did my dad ever come around?
Yeah.
Very interesting question. Here's what's interesting. I'm writing my next book, and I did a whole page or two on this. My dad, you know, as people grow older, he's 74 now. He's definitely softened up over the years, you know. He'll definitely give me a little hug when I leave now, and I'll never forget it, not too long ago, on an email he wrote, love you. That was big. And I was grateful for it. But here's what happens when you strive for personal wholeness on your own. It doesn't matter so much anymore. And that's what's so empowering about your own journey toward wholeness. You can really it's like I describe in my new book, I rewrote the script. Now the script, in my ideal world, didn't have to show my dad finally getting a clue, and giving me what I deserved and needed, because every little girl deserves that from her dad. Every son deserves to hear their dad say, I'm proud of you. You're carrying on the blessing. Everyone needs a blessing. There's a great book written about the blessing. It's in the heart of every human to search from their parent for a blessing. But most of us, frankly, are never going to get that. Why? Because our parents have their own issues. But we can get it on our own through faith, through community, through wholeness, through just coming into the truth. The truth sets us free. Once we know what's really going on, wow, there's clarity. You know, when you get diagnosed, when you got something wrong and you get diagnosed, it's a good day. It's like if we have a friend who's going through kind of what Jordan went through, but they still don't know what's wrong with her. I mean, they are suffering. They would give anything for a diagnosis. At least when we got Jordan's diagnosis, we knew what was wrong and we could treat it. So with you understanding, the fact that you're in tune with that, bravo. Bravo. That's awesome. Now you're aware. And you can begin to rewrite your own script. And then the other thing I've learned is when you're dealing with someone, you look at their heart. I've got kind of a crotchety father-in-law, Ron's dad. I love him. He's awesome. But every once in a while, he just says things, and you're just going, oh, please, Stanley, what are you saying? But I don't react. You know why? Because I look at his heart. You can look and begin to understand and know your dad's heart, even though he's not here anymore. How would he feel? Of course he'd be proud of you. Every father would be proud of their son. Just didn't have the vocabulary to share it. And so we come to those conclusions, and we get healing, we wholeness, and we move on. And I'm telling you, I want every person in here to be a full plate person. So you can lead, so you can raise up great children. Here's the good news. If you have kids someday, you get to break the curse. You get to say, no more. In fact, you'll be a better dad because of what you went through. And that's the redemptive part of coming into wholeness and learning the truth that sets us free. So I want to applaud you. It takes guts to come down here on a microphone and say that about your life, but bravo. And I hope that every one of us in this
Thank
room will
you.
do the same. Thank you.
On behalf of the 2012 Naval Academy Leadership Conference, we'd like to give you a gift as a token of our appreciation for being here today.
Wow, thank you. Oh, I love presents. Thank you so much. Appreciate it so much. Thank you all.